All right, ladies, gentlemen, gamers, and everyone else. Welcome back to a new video. A new video in the new little series I'm making called The Dark Dimension, which isn't really new, it's just a collection of depressing things about society and life. So, I had some ideas about minimum wage recently, and I wanted to talk about it. What was minimum wage historically? What is it now? What I think it should be, and so on and so forth. Also, I just want to add in the fact that there needs to be a minimum wage says a lot in my mind about society and how people don't really care for each other. With what minimum wage has become recently, one thing that's kind of disgusting is that it's something that needs to be enforced, and companies literally need to be forced to pay you a bare minimum because if they weren't forced to do this, we all know that they would try and pay us even less than that, which many, including myself, would argue is not even enough. But that kind of goes into what it was. So, a separate side issue is that I think society is wrong in a lot of ways, where more and more I'm noticing people that are higher up that do less work earn way more money than they should for what they're doing, while people on the lower end of the job spectrum have annoying massive amounts of work. I'm looking at McDonald's specifically, which is sometimes even physical, not with just McDonald's, but with other jobs too. And they get very little money. Now, I know this isn't all true all the time, so don't get your pitchforks and torches at me just yet. I know there's a lot of situations where this isn't the case. However, I've seen it be more than I thought it was originally growing through life. So, this can even leapfrog into another idea that's even more separate of just how people in society value different things, because sometimes that even dictates the price of things and how much people make. It's really just up to the people themselves. But that's going a little too far from the base idea for my taste. So, let's get back to the main idea. What minimum used to be. What minimum used to be was actually an amount of pay that guaranteed a certain style and quality of life that I think is much better than it was now. And this is pretty much historically provable too, since people can afford homes in their lifetime back in the day, back in the previous generations, the boomers and whatever the hell was before that, where nowadays you can work two lifetimes and not afford jack diddly, let alone a house. Now, obviously, I'm taking into account if you worked and you actually had expenses, so aka if you live in reality. So, a big issue is that companies without set minimum wage would need to know kind of what is enough for people to at least live, at least how much can we give them so they won't die, so we can keep them coming back to work and they could be somewhat healthy while providing us with the maximum amount of profit as possible. Which, you know what, now being honest, they still not might even give you or even do this because A, it's a lot of work on their end, which I'm sure if they wanted to, they could figure it out. But at the end of the day, someone can just replace you and take on the deplorable conditions that you're probably in, getting paid little to no money and probably in unsafe conditions anyway. Because I've noticed, even with my job and a lot of other jobs, they like to pretend they don't know the law. And sometimes they don't, but most of the time they do. They're just trying to bamboozle you. So, a major issue with this is we're all kind of working against each other with the way society is right now because we literally have to. Things are so expensive to where if we don't work, we're going to starve, which leads to these nonsense practices being furthered of like low pay, cutting corners, not implementing actual rules because there's always going to be someone desperate enough to take your place if you don't want to do it anymore or if you want better and they don't want to give it to you. This has already happened in our world today with one of the wealthiest companies out there, Amazon. Amazon doesn't care how bad things are. Obviously, they want to look good enough for the public because another different idea is, companies just do things publicly because it's all in their best interest for profit. Because if they're not doing things that look good to the common people aren't going to use their service. Even though sometimes they have no choice. But anyway, Amazon expects people to quit. They expect you to quit. But there's enough people that need a job that aren't making enough money, so they don't need to make things better. because it's actually cheaper to do what they've been doing, since there's always going to be someone to take that spot, at least for a kind of long time. Eventually, they're going to run through everyone, especially with their turnover rate, but it's not going to be for a very long time. So that brings us, talking about Amazon, to what is the minimum today? Well, if you're living today, as I am, on Friday, February 24th, 2023, then you'll know that minimum is basically, in a lot of places, a starvation wage. And in some places where I'm located at, which is the Big Apple, the greatest, oh man, I mean, worst city on earth, then minimum is literally unlivable unless you're either lucky enough to find a closet that counts as an apartment, or you're going to be with someone else and they can help you. It's really bad when people on CNBC's little series called Make It say that they make $50K a year in Brooklyn. And Kevin O'Leary, the popular shark on Shark Tank and, rich guy, he says that that much money is enough if you're living under a rock. He says he does not know how someone can survive off $50K in Brooklyn. And, that's cheaper than Manhattan, I'll tell you that. So, to put this in perspective, yearly wage with minimum pay, right, with minimum wage, assuming you work full time, which is 41 hours, is about $31,000, which is before taxes. So after getting triple taxed rated against, again, we're in the greatest city in the world where you pay federal, state, and city, you're probably bringing home after everything around about $25,000. So that's already half of what Kevin O'Leary said you need to live under a rock. So that kind of says something. When things in society are going so crazy, like inflation, food prices, gas prices, rent prices, I wouldn't be surprised if New York implemented a breathing air price soon, but that's probably going to be unaffordable as well, because I feel like New York is just for rich people at this point, or at least it's getting gentrified to be that. But again, that's a different idea. It makes me wonder, though, how are people able to live in the city if you're on your own making minimum? You literally can't unless, again, you're lucky enough to find a closet or someone else. So if you get a partner, you can at least be poor together and not homeless. But if you don't get a partner, you're probably going to be on the massive line that I see every day after work, which is ever increasing, which is poor people who are homeless waiting for free food. It's basically safe to say that minimum wage currently is basically poverty. And the best part of this is, at least in New York State, for some reason, the state doesn't consider this below the poverty line. If you work full-time, 40 hours a week on minimum, or even part-time, 20 hours a week on a minimum, you are still making more than enough to be counted under the poverty line, which means, guess what? You can't get any assistance. Isn't that grand? You can't afford anything else, but you can't get help. So, we finally get to the idea of what should minimum be and why is it like this. Minimum used to be amazing, as I said. They kind of flubbed up the economy now, and I don't think we can get anywhere near to what it was. I think that's just wishful thinking. However, I think that as a society, with all our technological advancements, that we can at least guarantee that people who work full-time can afford to have some place to stay, some place to eat, and some place to sleep. These are common things that people would be even considering that they're just basic rights, but we don't even have that in New York and some other places too. So the average rent in the city is literally more than all you can make. I'll take the Bronx alone because the richest borough, or the most expensive borough rather, in New York is Manhattan. Bronx is typically seen on the cheaper side, but the average rent in the Bronx is $2,000. If you're making minimum wage, you're making about $1,920 a month, and this is after taxes. And if you don't spend a single cent on anything else after taxes, so if you don't buy food, if you don't pay bills, if you don't pay to get to work, if you're just breathing for a whole month and finding food in the trash, drinking from the tap water, which, that's a bill in and of itself, so that's going to get shut off, you still wouldn't even be able to afford rent. You'd still be behind. If you paid if you used everything you had to try and pay rent without paying anything else, you would still be behind by $60. Or not even 60, I'm doing my math wrong. $80. So it's getting to the question again of what should be the minimum. I will go over this later. We're not done yet. The real question I'm going to tackle is, why is it like this? Like many of you have seen on my channel, I often say we're in the dark dimension, hence I'm making a whole new video series just kind of grouping them together about where I talk of why we're in the dark dimension and how. And I've explained multiple reasons as to why in a lot of those videos, but to summarize and condense things, it basically gets boiled down to this. People are evil. I think greed and corruption have essentially made it so things have not only been left unchecked, but things are almost irreversible since it's the rich versus the poor, and the rich set everything up to basically work against us, and we can't fix it. It boils down to the rich want to hoard wealth in both legal messed up ways, which include paying minimum wage, which, like I said, is not even a living wage, and they offer raises that are less than inflation, so you're actually, year by year, earning less than you were before. You're actually making even less money as time goes on. And then there's illegal messed up ways too, like not repairing things or cutting corners. I mean, just look at the Ohio train chemical wreck that happened. That was very preventable, and the workers talked about it for years, how it should be fixed, but no fixes happened because that means more profit in their pockets. So essentially what I'm saying is that things are fucked because rich people are greedy and they set up this corrupt system so almost no one can stop them in any way, with or without even the government, because they lobbied our government and our president to side against the train unions and anything else they really want. It's very hard to fight against this big behemoth. So finally, we get to the original question of where minimum should be. Well, there's a lot of things like inflation and consumer price index that people use that can tell us just how much things are increasing in cost and how much everything is going to cost us. However, I find it a little weird that even though we know these things, from just living my life, from what I've heard and what I've seen, not many people actually calculate what the minimum should actually be. Now, there's a couple problems that go into this. I'm not going to go over them all, but some of the problem is what defines what a minimum wage should be, what kind of life should it guarantee you, because everyone has a different interpretation of that. And then it also depends on the area, because there's some areas like, you know, the greatest city in the world, excuse me, I mean the worst city, where, you know, things are just ludicrously expensive. So there needs to be a different minimum depending on the location, plus depending on how much things cost. So something that I think should be implemented to kind of give a solution to this is there should be a new type of job where people in every area have this job where they take a record of inflation, they take a record of the prices and any other economic occurrences that happen, and they should see with constant updates how much you really need to live, and that should be where the minimum is at. It shouldn't be like a federal, you know, countrywide thing. It should be specific to every single place, like cities or suburbs or whatever. It should be very specific. And this agreed upon minimum shouldn't be a starvation wage or a paycheck to paycheck wage. It should be, you know, if you're getting the bare necessities and you're living with someone who's working, because as I showed before, minimum isn't even enough to pay rent if you spend all of it on rent and don't even eat. It needs to be a livable wage, where I think what livable means is you can sleep, you can eat, and you can partake in some nice non-essential expenses without worrying. But in life, from what I've noticed, people won't do these things that make sense because they want to take advantage, exploit, and profit off each other for selfish gain. It's really, really sad because I don't think something like this will happen because, again, it actively goes against what the rich people want, which is to amass more and more billions and trillions of dollars. For what reason? Just to see the number get bigger. I don't even know. To stroke their egos or to one-up each other. So I think what minimum has really become, honestly, is a wage for the people who just can't survive and can't adapt to get better jobs. And, you know, the rich people just don't seem to care because they're the ones who set it and who make the rules. Because God knows our government isn't going to do it. They're busy arguing with each other. But anyway, it's all pretty sad. But again, that's the reason for these Dark Dimension videos, which I'm now grouping, hopefully. But anyway, that's pretty much it. That was just my ideas on minimum wage. Tell me what you guys think in the comments. Tell me if you agree, disagree, have anything to add. Also, you should watch me at Twitch TV Technics channel. If you're poor, that's a great thing because it's free to do as long as you have internet. But there's free Wi-Fi. But anyway, hope everyone enjoyed. Come watch me there.